Republicans, conservatives, alt-right, libertarians, anybody moderately leaning right, the Second Amendment doesn't give you a single right. Quit being autistic.
This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
Coming at you from a hidden location deep in the woods somewhere in Texas. Slightly overweight, probably intoxicated, nevertheless mercifully insatiable alpha male. This is the Juliet Delta Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Juliet Podcast. I am your host, Juliet Delta. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming back. Today we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. Oh, the Holy Grail. The holiest of holies. The sacred Second Amendment. I've been wanting to do this for a while. Time to stir some shit up. Time to piss off some of my fellow conservatives. I put quotations around conservatives. Y'all couldn't see it, but I did it. Hold on a second. Let me give me a little pinch of snow. Oh, there we go. That's a good one. Now, where's my whiskey? Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. Oh, that makes me feel better. So much better. I can work now. All right. Now, where were we? Oh, and as always, I'm drinking Bullet Rye, the green label. They make a red label, which is their regular whiskey. They make a white label, which is their 10-year. But they make a green labeled rye whiskey, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, for the money, I don't think you can drink better. And as always, we're drinking it on the rocks like a fucking man, because that's how you're supposed to drink whiskey. If you want to put Coke in it, just don't put the whiskey and just drink fucking Coke. Or rum. Drink some Malibu and pineapple juice, you puss. Man up and drink whiskey on the rocks. Hey, I'm okay if you want to add a little splash of water. That opens it up, lets it breathe. I'm okay with that. I mean, that's proper. But this whole Coke added to it and Sprite and, oh, I gotta have a sweet whiskey. No, you don't. You're a pussy. Grow up, drink man drink. Get you a good bottle of brown water. I suggest Bullet. You know, different strokes for different folks. You may not like it. I don't know why you wouldn't, but whatever. Anyway, I think we're all ready now. Hold on, wait a minute. There was a piece of advice I had to give. I can't remember. Oh, men, if you've ever uttered the words, let me check with my wife, or my wife said I can, or my wife said she'll let me, she's fucking cheating on you, or she's going to cheat on you. Man up and quit being a cuck. Oh, now it's time to get into the real topic. The real topic of today, the Second Amendment. Now, I'm going to be referring to an article that I think, I've looked at a ton of articles online about this topic. And let me pull it up here. Give me half a sec. All right, here we go. So, this article was written by Suzanne Sherman. And like I said, I've read a ton of stuff. I've really delved into the Second Amendment, federalism, the true intentions of the founders, the intentions of the ratifiers, which the states, regarding the Second Amendment. You sit here as a conservative, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm a little R Republican with Jeffersonian principles. I lean very libertarian. I'm very small federal government. I believe in self-governing, governing yourself. I believe in true liberty and most of all sovereignty. I believe in state sovereignty. I believe that's the way we were up until, well, it was slowly being eroded. The Civil War was a huge milestone that, started taking away the state sovereignty. If you don't understand what I mean there, check out my other episode about Abraham Lincoln. It just dropped a couple of days ago. I, I don't think it can be more clear. It's about an hour, a little over an hour playtime, and I think you'll learn everything you need to know about Abraham Lincoln and how he began to, how he wasn't the beginning, but he really turned the jets on when it came to taking away state sovereignty, and that's why I think him and Woodrow Wilson tie is probably the worst president of all time. I can go back and forth. When I delve into Abraham Lincoln, I'm like, hell, he's the worst. And then when I jump into Woodrow Wilson, I'm like, oh my God, he's the worst. So I'm going to have to throw it as a tie right now. Maybe one day I'll make it a definitive, he's the worst. But for right now, they're tied. Anyway, back to Suzanne Sherman. Suzanne Sherman is basically a retired licensed attorney. She quit her practice to raise her children. And back in 2013, I believe, she left California where she had lived. I don't know how long she lived there, but she lives in a remote area in some mountains. And she makes radio appearances and she hosts her own shows and speaks on the principles of federalism, history, and liberty. And you can find her on Facebook. You can find her all over the place. Most of her stuff airs on YouTube. Um, but she wrote an article for the 10th Amendment Center. And the 10th Amendment Center, most of the time, has stuff right. It puts a totally different spin on the way we were indoctrinated. And when I say we, I'm not talking about liberals. I know they're retards. I'm talking about the conservatives. I'm talking about our indoctrination where we're totally wrong. We're half right about so many issues. We're totally wrong about a lot of issues. And principally we lean, I lean principally, and my moral character and my moral compass leans, hard right. However, I find with my fellow man and my fellow my peers in the right, so many people are indoctrinated to the wrong ideas, and they're counterproductive. They're hurting ourselves. They're hurting the cause. They're hurting liberty. They're hurting our sovereignty and our freedom. They don't mean to. They just don't know any better, and that's why I want to talk about the Second Amendment today. And I'm gonna piss some people off. I'm gonna pick some. If you're one of these my gun America now, America and my guns, and you ain't gonna take it from my cold dead hands, and you ain't gonna even hear, and you don't give a shit what the founders said, you don't give a shit what the states that ratified the Constitution, the 10 Amendments, the Second Amendment said, you don't care about their intentions, you don't care about history, you don't want to hear how the federal government has bamboozled you and indoctrinated you to think the way you think about the Second Amendment, and you all you care about is I'm keeping my gun and I'm gonna stand on it, and I don't even want to hear anything. Take your autism elsewhere. I don't give a shit. I don't want to talk to you. You're autistic. I need people to listen that actually have an open mind and care about making a difference and care about understanding, realizing there's a flaw somewhere, and it's not in the system. The flaw is in our understanding of the system. And if we truly understood how it's supposed to be and how it can be and how it used to be and how it's been corrupted and bastardized now, we can fix it and turn it around by voting for people that understand this stuff. If not, we're going to the status quo is going to be the same, and we're just going to be in this total level of autism. And I'm tired of it, at least on the right. I don't give a shit about the left. If you're on the left and listening and you're a liberal and you have an open mind, come on. I hope you listen too, because this might change your opinions on things. I think this will help both sides, get what they want. And because I don't care what California does, I don't care about their gun laws. If liberals want to live there and have zero guns and want to be slaughtered by criminals daily in gun free zones, let them do it. Eventually, they'll get tired of it. I don't want it being practiced around the entire U.S. I want Californians to be able to do it and have their own little experiment. And if a liberal says, "Hey, I think you're wrong. It won't happen. I still want it this way." Go for it. I'll be watching from my hidden location in the woods in Texas. Anyway, Suzanne Sherman. I'm gonna tag. Uh, I'm gonna tag this article in the description. I want everybody to be able to go read it. I don't think there's a better single documentation that explains concealed carry reciprocity in the United States on a national level. And most pro gun people and Second Amendment people are for national concealed carry reciprocity. And her article isn't it called National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Bill is a Trojan Horse. And I think it's something so important that we need to start understanding, people on the right. Let's start opening our minds a little bit. We've been bamboozled. So let's get into it. If you got a tiniest bit of open mind, stick with me for the next however long I'm doing this. Who knows? It might be a 30-minute episode, it may be a 3-hour one. We'll dive right in. So most I'm gonna refer to her article and I'm gonna paraphrase some stuff. I'm gonna take some sentences here or there. I've already contacted her. She's allowed me to reference her article throughout this podcast. She doesn't know me personally. She doesn't know anything about my podcast, so she just gave me permission to share it and use it as a source. So she doesn't know what I represent. So I want to take away any, you know, she's a very classy lady. I'm in here talking about drinking whiskey and, alpha male stuff and whatever on some episodes. And then some episodes I'm talking about serious shit. And, I'm kind of wanting to talk to the everyday guy, the people I hang out with, all my buddies. I want them to know this. So she's on a much more educated, classy level, and I don't want to drag her down here with me in that sense. So she's not really associated with me in any way. So I want to relieve her of all that. However, I hope that I can take what she said so eloquently and written so eloquently and put it more on a level that I am and that the people I associate her on. So that's the whole point of this today. Getting back to it, to what she basically says in the article, that on its face it seems like a wonderful ideal to have a federal law that says, okay, in Texas, if I get a concealed handgun license, a federal or a national concealed carry reciprocity bill says I get my concealed carry license in Texas, and I can go to any 50 states with my gun, and those states have to recognize my license and the rules from the state I'm in. Sounds great, right? However, it's a Trojan horse, and I'll explain why. On its face, she writes, this seems like a wonderful idea, but the threshold inquiry should be, does the federal or general government have the authority to enact such a law? See, we don't even think about it as Republicans, as conservatives, as libertarians, people on the right. We don't sit back. That's the number one thing we don't do when we listen to people debating for office, when we listen to people campaigning and talking about issues. We don't ever, I never hear, except for the few people, and Suzanne Sherman's one of them, there's several, but the general public doesn't sit and say, are they even allowed to, entertain that stuff? Is that an issue they're able to infringe upon on a national level? No, we never ask that. We just go, oh, okay, we got our king in there that we like, so we want him to dictate to us. And, then we'll just bitch when the next time the Democrats are in office. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to work. That's not the way the founders set it up. That's not the way the states ratified for us to run a government. All right. So Any firearm, she writes, any firearm enthusiast is aware of the variety of regulations governing them in among all the 50 states. And of course, in Texas, I know the Texas laws when it comes to concealed carry, when it comes to firearms. I don't know the laws in, for example, some even my bordering states. I don't really know that much about the Oklahoma laws, the Louisiana laws, Arkansas laws, New Mexico laws. But I know a little bit about them. But you go past, a couple states out, I don't know anything because I don't travel there regularly. But there's laws. Each gun law is different in all 50 states. Some are extremely liberal and very restricting, and some are not, restricting in the least. Well, the problem is once basically what uh, her entire article, the 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 conclusion of it is, if you give the federal government, who doesn't have the authority, and it doesn't, to make this law and infringe upon Texas gun rights, what's going to happen is the people of California, we'll use them as an example. I like to contrast Texas and California because I live in Texas and I obviously don't and wouldn't in California. And their local laws in that state are much more strict and they're much more heavily regulated than Texas. So they're going to be pissed off when a bunch of Texans come in and don't have to follow those laws. Okay? So then they're going to petition and there's going to be suits and it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And guess what? The Supreme Court's not going to say, oh, well, Second Amendment, we can't infringe. They're going to say, well, you asked us to already, and when you gave us this law. So it's only our duty to continue infringing. And then what they'll say is they'll start making up federal regulations, and they're not going to go on the most lenient restrictions. They're going to go toward the most heavy restrictions because governments don't ever give away power, they only take more. I mean, never in history has the government said, you know what, we're going to give away our power. It's never happened. So you can bet that it's a Trojan horse. As soon as you give them permission to pass this bill and give them permission to infringe on your rights, well, they're just going to keep taking. Before you know it, there's going to be a complete federal regulation over guns instead of what you vote on here locally in your own respective state. She goes on and talks. She kind of breaks things down, and I want to also say that she made it clear that she had someone else contributed to this article. His name's Carl Jones, and he's a former active duty U.S. Marine and a certified firearms instructor. He's a contributing writer for the Abbeville Institute and member of the Society of Independent Southern Historians. I also have read many things by him and followed him on social media, and he's a pretty cool cat. He knows what he's talking about. But she breaks things down, and she kind of starts, explaining why the Second Amendment. And she wants to kind of give an accurate constitutional understanding of the Second Amendment. And that's where we're in big trouble when it comes to the Republican and conservative side and this pro Second Amendment side. She writes, one must consider the context with which it was adopted. She's talking about the Second Amendment and the Constitution, and the thinking at the time of the generation that brought it into fruition. Likewise, one must grasp the intent of the Constitution in general, which simply instituted a union of sovereign republics and created a general government to which certain specific enumerated powers were delegated. All right, go back and listen to my Abraham Lincoln podcast, but I'll say it again here. When we formed a union, we did not become a nation. We formed a union of sovereign countries, little republics, and we created a very limited, not a limited, we formed a general government that was very limited. It had very limited powers. Specific enumerated powers were delegated by the sovereign states. At the time it was 13, now there's 50. So we're 50 independent republic countries. We don't realize that. Most people say, nope, 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 I'm not. Yes, you are. The faster you understand this and the faster you start voting for people that understand this, the faster you'll be sovereign and free. And it won't matter to you who's who's making laws and who's having to live under laws like they do in California. It's none of your business. And guess what? If they fall into complete despair, we can be living in the Garden of Eden where we are. So she goes on to start making more things clear, and we'll read a little more. The founding generation had an immense fear of standing armies, she writes. These led to war, and the overwhelming majority of instances also led naturally to a centralized power in government. She goes on and talks about James Madison and how he felt about it. I'm not going to read word for word her entire article, but she basically gives a lot of credibility, and she sources her opinion, which is, you got to start doing that kind of stuff, people. A lot of people have their own opinion and don't say anything. But what she concludes is that the Second Amendment, she writes, it came about as a means of preventing the need for standing armies by keeping the militia. That is to say, that every able-bodied person in their individual state. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The powers reserved to the several states will concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Madison uh, wrote that in the Federalist 45, and she sources it here. Up until the Civil War, everyone was free and sovereign. They didn't have a king. They didn't have a president that did anything to them, really. Um, Abraham Lincoln said, I'm going to be your king and dictator and tell you how to live. And people said, no, hell no, we're not going to have a king. And the free people fought uh, overreaching power of a federal government. And free people lost. Think about that. Free people lost. That means they're not free anymore. So along comes the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War, or not long after. But it kind of sat there stagnant for a while. And then later on in 1925, in the case of Gitlow versus New York, that Supreme Court magically found, she puts in quotations, found the authority to apply the Bill of Rights against the states. Supposedly it was hidden away in the 14th Amendment, an amendment that, by the way, she makes clear was never legally ratified, and it wasn't. You can study up on the 14th Amendment if you want to. I'm not going to go deep into detail there. The creation of law by the court is problematic, she says, as well as unhistorical. The 39th Congress, which proposed this amendment, never even discussed such an incorporation, and no such premise had been adhered to in the preceding years. But by 1925, the quote unquote progressive era was in full swing, and the Supreme Court was well on its way toward inflicting a complete rewrite of the Constitution onto the United States and the American people. I also want to say, when she says the federal government, things like that, she always puts in lowercase, and when she refers to state, she always capitalizes state, and I love that. I love that. I do that too. State is always more important than the federal government. State trumps federal government. Stop thinking that the federal government and the Supreme Court has all the power in your own state. And you know who your state is? You, retards. You are your own state. Stop having this mindset that they are the king and you are the servant, the peasants. Oh, but Juliet Delta, if the Constitution doesn't apply to me, I don't have a Second Amendment, they'll come take my guns. No. Who's going to come take your guns? It says the federal government can't infringe. They can't do shit. You already have gun laws in your own state constitution, and they regulate you. They don't listen to the Second Amendment. They don't sit here. Every single state has never said, well, the Second Amendment, they go, the Second Amendment doesn't apply to the state and the state constitution and the laws in each state. It just says it's a restriction on the federal government only. The federal government can't come and confiscate guns. They can't touch it. They can't infringe on it. So when we ask for constitutional carry, we're asking the federal government to infringe on our sovereignty and our free gun rights, our freedoms, and our gun rights here in your respective state. Constitutional carry is begging the federal government to take power where they have none. We have to quit being autistic, people. We have to do a little more research. We've been hand fed this all our lives and we never questioned what we were eating. So frustrating. It's so frustrating to talk to gun loving people, and I have guns all over my house and every vehicle. Every time I travel, I carry a weapon with me. I love my guns, and in Texas, I have the right to bear arms. No, the Second Amendment of the Constitution doesn't give me anything. All it does is says the federal government can't fucking touch my right as a Texan in regards to guns, in regard to arms. She goes on to discuss the incorporation doctrine and how it's total bullshit. I suggest you reading that and studying up on it. Gutzman, Dr. Kevin Gutzman, has a book titled The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution. You can find it on Amazon or you can Google him. There's links to buy his book. I'm telling you, if you want something that you can plow through in about 2 days and you can't put it down and you want to understand the Constitution and understand how it only applies and restricts the federal government and it doesn't apply in any way to the states and to the people, read that book. You'll understand it. She goes on to talk about the dangers of national reciprocity and basically saying the things that I talked about earlier. If this bill becomes law, she writes, California will likely take strong exception to an influx of armed visitors, as its residents repeatedly elect representation who has made it one of the most restrictive states in the union regarding firearms. What then? Typically, when there's an inconsistency of rule of law among the states, the federal judiciary jumps in and addresses the issue. I said this earlier. The Supreme Court will say, oh, well, you ask us to infringe, so I guess we better keep infringing. Thereby, you're granting the federal government or the Supreme Court will grant themselves and other two branches of our federal government more power. It's an opportunity they rarely, if ever, pass up, she writes. She goes on to write several other things regarding the dangers, and I'll let you read it. She talks about basically examples of how this all could happen, how it could be a Trojan horse. I really like basically her last paragraph when she sums up her article, and it's not a very long article. It'll take you a few minutes. Again, find the link. I'll put it. It should be available on iTunes, YouTube, and Podbean, and the link will be there in the description. Her last paragraph: if one accepts the fallacious notion that the Second Amendment grants the general or federal government the authority to pass this law, or accepts incorporation of the Bill of Rights against the states, meaning that you believe that the Bill of Rights applies to the states, then they accept federal dominion over the states and are suggesting that the people of each individual state does not, in fact, have a right to their own self government. If they accept that premise, then it is further proof that we have surrendered our revolutionary legacy as a federal union of sovereign republics. Wow, how much stronger can you be when it comes to that? I'm going to switch gears. That's pretty much all I'm going to talk about her article. Um, I'll share this with her, and hopefully we can get some comments. If she likes it, again, she doesn't know who I am really. I'm hoping she'll listen. I'm hoping she'll like what we're talking about here today. And if she'll agree, we're gonna have her on the show. We're gonna figure out how to do some Skype calls and record this for the podcast. I'm working on all that now. I hope the audio is better today. We got a new mic, some more equipment. This is a one man show. I'm doing this in my hidden shelter in the woods, and we're just going play. We're just playing here. We're learning how it goes, and I'm learning myself. I edit it, record it, edit it, publish it, all on my own dime, and I'm having fun doing it. I hope somebody gets something out of it. If not, hey, I had a good time. So if she come on the show, that'll be a fun time. Moving on. McDonald versus the city of Chicago. This is a Supreme Court decision that most pro Second Amendment NRA people stood up and cheered. I did too because I didn't know any better at the time. But McDonald versus Chicago is I'm going to just jump into Wikipedia. I understand Wikipedia is not a empirical source, but for the most part, it gives you a pretty good synopsis about most things that you can then dig into to find the real truth. A lot of times there's a spin there. I think we found that when we were talking about Abraham Lincoln. But it's a landmark decision, it says, of the Supreme Court of the United States that found that the right of an individual to keep and bear arms as protected under the Second Amendment is incorporated by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment against the states. The decision cleared up the uncertainty left in the wake of the District of Columbia versus Heller as the scope of gun rights in regard to the states. Basically, what happened is there's a fella named McDonald, and he lived in Chicago. And Chicago said, no more guns. They started having these very restrictive gun laws. And McDonald took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, well, yeah, we'll hear it. We'll hear this court case. What does the Second Amendment say? It says, shall not be infringed by the federal government. What does that mean? They can't touch it. They can't think about it. They can't talk about it. They can't even entertain an idea about our gun rights. But what did they do? We beg them. Please, please, please be the superior authority on this issue. Please infringe. Mr. McDonald said, please infringe on my gun rights, my sovereignty. Oh, holy Supreme Court. Oh, 9 unelected judges. You can protect me. I'll give up my sovereignty and freedoms if you'll, give me a ruling that I like. And of course, the Supreme Court said, City of Chicago, State of Illinois, we will infringe on Mr. McDonald's Second Amendment rights. And when I say Second Amendment rights, he doesn't. The Second Amendment doesn't infringe. The Second Amendment doesn't apply to him. The Second Amendment only protects him from the federal government. It restricts the federal government. And they said, okay, you wanna take that away, that protection away? You wanna take that restriction off of us? You bet. We'll jump right in. Let us infringe. Now everybody jumped up and down on the right. All your gun people, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, your NRA members, they jumped up and down and said, oh, that's right. He gets to keep his gun. The Supreme Court ruled right. What'd you do? You gave them and you begged them and you asked them to infringe and violate the Second Amendment, which was the restriction. You lifted the restriction of the Second Amendment off of the Supreme Court. So what does that do? It starts setting a precedent. Every time this happens, it sets a precedent. So 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from then, what's going to happen is more cases are going to go, and the Supreme Court's going to say, well, you've historically set a precedent. You ask us to infringe here. Of course, they're not going to say infringe. They're just going to say we have the ability to even hear this court case because you allowed us. we're not violating the Second Amendment. You're begging us to come in here and take power and jurisdiction over an issue that we don't. So since you begged us, guess what? We're never giving that power back to you. That's what happens. That's what will happen. Make no doubt about it. The federal government will never say, well, you begged us to violate you in your freedom today, but we'll take a step back as soon as this single issue's over and we'll give that power back to you. Come on, people. Come on, Second Amendment people. Come on, pro-gun people. Come on, conservatives. Come on, Republicans. Let's start thinking a little bit. I used the word autistic earlier. That's what we're doing. We're so autistic when it comes to this issue. And we're so close-minded. I mean, we're just like, no, the Second Amendment, Second Amendment. We're so passionate about it. The Second Amendment doesn't mean shit to you, dude. And gal. Except for the fact that it restricts the federal government from having any power over it. When you say you want the Second Amendment to apply to you, you're saying you want the federal government to apply to you. The federal government doesn't give you any rights, doesn't give you any gun rights. You give yourself rights in a republic, in a sovereign republic. You vote for people that represent you, and you make laws in your area, which is your state, your little country, that the laws represent your principles and morals. And here in Texas, we live by a certain set of laws that represent the majority's principles and morals. If somebody here doesn't like the laws here and it doesn't align with their principles, they're free to go to California. And likewise, if there's someone in California that says this is too restrictive, too oppressive, my freedoms are just too far gone, they can move to a state like Texas or Louisiana. Guess what? That's federalism. That's true freedom. That's what the people, after they fought a bloody revolutionary war, said, this is our best, no government's perfect, but this is our best chance of having true freedom. If the state we live in becomes oppressive, we'll move to a state that's not. And guess what? If your state makes a whole bunch of laws that are pro-people and pro-freedom and pro-business, low taxes, low regulations, low restrictions, it's naturally going to prosper. Capitalism will take over naturally, and be much more wealthy state, and the people will be much more wealthy, happy, successful. Well, when that happens, the states that are the opposite, they're going to lose a lot of people that are migrating out to states that give the people freedom. And then those states will go bankrupt one day, or they'll have to change eventually. When you take that aspect away where people have the choice to move to another state, another quote unquote little sovereign country, a little sovereign republic, then they're just trapped in this big nation that is ruled by 9 unelected officials, president. These just the people in Washington D.C. decide how all of us have to live on a blanket scale, just across the board. This is how every one of you will live. The people of Texas, we've decided the principles that you're going to live by, and we've taken the principles of Californians. And guess what? Everyone in all 50 states have to live by these principles. So constitutional carry, the Second Amendment, people, you're asking the federal government to rule over you and take power that they don't have. Give it up. You're hurting the cause. You're setting us up for historical failure in the future. Our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, generations to come, are going to look back and go, God, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, they were such idiots. They begged the federal government to take power they didn't have because they just chose to be uneducated on the issue. And they just ate what they were spoon-fed regarding the Second Amendment. And they loved their guns and they loved their gun rights. And they didn't even want to find out what the truth was. And you sit here and say, I know the first thing you're going to say, because this is the first thing that most people tell me when I talk to people about this. Well, if what you're saying is true, and the Second Amendment doesn't protect me, the state will just take away my gun rights. No, you have a state constitution. Are you saying that your state constitution doesn't matter? By saying that the Second Amendment rules over you and applies to you, you're saying your by saying that the Second Amendment applies to you, you are saying that your state constitution is irrelevant. The state constitution represents you, Texans, you people of Louisiana, you people of Arkansas, you people of California. That's what your constitution represents. Those are your laws in your state. You vote on them with like-minded people around you. Your state constitution trumps the federal constitution. It's supposed to. That's freedom. That's sovereignty. That's liberty. That's what people died in a revolutionary war against a dictator. But now, what do conservatives and Republicans say? We don't want that. We don't want freedom. Freedom's scary. Liberty's scary. No, we want a king. We want a king, and right now his name's Trump. A few years ago, his name was Obama. And who knows who the next one will be. We want a king, and we want the ability to vote for a king. And if we win, we'll have it good for 4 or 8 years. And if we lose, we'll have it shitty for 4 or 8 years. But guess what? It really doesn't get better or worse. When we switch parties, it's just progressively getting worse all the time. It progressively gets worse. It gets worse faster when there's Democrats and liberals in power. It gets worse slowly when Republicans and conservatives in power. You know why? Because the federal government will continue to take power that it doesn't have. So when the Republicans and conservatives are in charge, they take power at a slower rate. When the Democrats and liberals are in charge, the federal government takes power at a much more a faster rate, a more rapid rate. It's time to end that. We can end that right now. You can have the gun laws you want. If we give up this whole Second Amendment bullshit and this whole constitutional carry bullshit and realize we have the power here in the state of Texas and you, wherever you're listening in your state, to have exactly the type of gun laws you want, then make it happen. Start a cause. Gather up the voters. Get a bill. Vote people in that will go to your state and form these laws. It's that simple. You can live exactly how you want to live. And guess what? California over there, they can live exactly how they want to live. And it's none of our business here in Texas. They can take their guns, complete confiscation of guns. And guess what? Doesn't matter to me in Texas. I won't go visit. I won't go there for work. I won't go there for vacation. And a bunch of people won't either. And then they'll go bankrupt. And then they'll have to change. You let them fail. Instead, you Second Amendment people, you concealed carry people, you're making all of us fail slowly. And there's nowhere to run. There's no safe haven. When you want everything to apply on a blanket level to all 50 states. So Second Amendment people, give it up. Stand on your own state constitution. Stand on your own gun rights that your own state gives you and realize that trumps the federal government. Quit asking the federal government to make regulations and any rules, whether how lenient or how restrictive. Anytime you ask them to rule, you're giving them the power over that issue that they don't have. That's what we got to cut out. I mean, I can go into a room full of conservatives in just about any church in America that's very conservative and say, do you want the federal government to outlaw abortion? Every single person would stand up and cheer. What do I say? I say, absolutely not. Because I don't want them to, they're not supposed to have that power. I want the federal government to stand up and say, we don't have, it's nowhere in the Constitution do we have the power to rule over an issue like abortion, like gay rights, like gay marriage, guns. We don't have the constitutional authority to rule on any of those issues. You people get to decide how you live regarding those issues in your state. And guess what? If Texas wants to say gay marriage is not legal in their state and abortion is not legal, and we want everybody to walk around carrying guns in their pocket with no registration, then we can do it. And if California says we want abortion given free to every person paid by the taxpayers of California, not the federal government, and we want guns confiscated, complete outlaw of guns, so all law-abiding citizens will have zero guns and only criminals will have guns. And we want only gay marriage. Matter of fact, heterosexual marriage is outlawed. Then they can do it. Let those people live how they want. It's none of our fucking business. Let them fail. Let them be an example to other states not to do that. And if Texas does something that fails, we, the people of Texas, Texans, can go forth and change it. It's so frustrating to me to see so many of my peers and colleagues begging for the federal government to take power they don't have by standing on the Constitution as if it applies to them. It does not. Do your research. Understand what federalism is. Understand what the founders said. Understand what the states that ratified, what they meant when they formed this union, what powers they gave the federal government. Very limited and very defined. Everything else is stated in the 10th Amendment belongs to the state. Us, the people. We have the power. We sit around like these just servant peasants that are just, we're hoping our side wins so we can have a good king for 4 years. I want no king. I'm hashtag no king, hashtag no SCOTUS. They're allowed to rule on very specific issues lined out in the Constitution. I have no problem with them ruling on those issues. Everything else is left to the state, and us locally, we decide how we live. We decide how Texans live by our principles here, and so do all the other 49 states. That's true freedom. How can anybody argue about living in a society like that where we decide how we live locally? Your state, your county, your city, we decide. If we don't like it, we pack up and move if we're the minority in that specific area. If we don't like it, we get a different job. If it's that important to us. If they make gay marriage, if the people of Texas voted for gay marriage, it's not that big of a deal to me. It's a big deal to some people. If they're extremely religious and they're anti-homosexual marriage, maybe it's something that they're willing to pack up and move. I guarantee you, if you allowed this freedom like this, a lot of those people wouldn't be so strong in their resolve. They wouldn't give too much of a shit about gay marriage if you said, look, Louisiana says, and Mississippi says no gay marriage, but people in Texas did. You're free to move. It wouldn't be that big of an issue to a lot of people. There's some that would pack up and move, and more power to them. That's true freedom. That's federalism. That's what our founders set up for us. That's what the people ratified for us. And we've shit it away. We've just given it away throughout the years. And now we beg for them to take more power. We beg them to take power and rule over issues that they have no business. We beg for federal regulations. I mean, think about this. Second Amendment people, pro-gun people, NRA people, they spend money begging the federal government to take power. Am I anti-NRA? No. Am I anti-Second Amendment? No, because it limits the federal government. Am I anti-gun rights? No, I have a state constitution that gives me very very good gun rights that I'm happy with. There's only one caveat in my Texas Constitution that I want to do away with. And I'm actively voting for people, for senator and congressman, that will help get rid of that caveat. That's my job. That's your job as a Texan, as a Louisianian, as a Mississippian, as an Alabamian, as a Californian, somebody from Washington State, someone from Maryland. That's your job. Elect people that will make laws that are in line with your principles and morals. And then you don't have to worry about who's living over there and what laws they're under and their principles. By giving the federal government and the Supreme Court the power to rule over these issues, guess what? That's how you have things like where they ruled over gay marriage the other day. What was it, a couple years ago? They rule over abortion, Roe v. Wade. They don't have that power, but we beg them to take the power and rule over it. We got to quit being autistic, conservatives and Republicans. We've got to stop. We've got to take back our liberty and sovereignty. Because if we don't, we're going to continue down this road. We're going to continue down this road where the federal government takes power that they don't have. And we're going to continue down this horrible road where we're begging them to take power and giving them power they don't have. And we'll continue to be ruled by a king and 9 unelected judges that sit on 9 thrones in Washington, D.C. Take care.